So I'm doing real quick here a important case. It is the case of Nicholas Troy Sheley, a infamous serial killer in Illinois. This is important to be able to cover this, and so we're going to be able to cover this for a bit. Be sure to spread the word, like, comment, subscribe. Thank you. Serial killer Nicholas Troy Sheley's trial begins. One of 7 potential jurors was retained Tuesday for the murder trial involving the death of a Galesburg man, Ronald Randall. An Abington mother of 5 said she would be able to provide a fair trial because she has not seen any media reports on the incident, does not know any of the attorneys involved in this case, especially. I would be able to hear both sides of it. Judge James Stewart said he was looking for 12 jurors and 4 alternates. Groups of 6 were questioned about their jobs, relationships with the attorneys in the case, and relationships with the defendant. Earlier Tuesday morning, about 87 members were oriented and interviewed. He told them they will not be sequestered during this trial. So this is very interesting because Nicholas Shealy murdered at least 7 people in Illinois, and 2 of those victims were family. This older gentleman and his wife and their child were apparently all killed. And this was in 2008. So this was a recent serial killer case, one of the few that's been within the last 8 years or so. So this is very important. We're going to be covering the important aspects and the most important highlights. Thank you. Killer of 8 drops to knees to apologize for bi-state murder spree. The families of victims all scoff. In Hillsborough, a man who killed 6 people in Illinois 9 years ago pleaded guilty Wednesday to murdering a couple at a hotel in Festus. Judge Gary Kramer sentenced Nicholas Troy Sheley to life without possibility of parole for the murder of Tom and Jill Estes. And he also murdered 7 other people on top of that. The sentence wasn't enough for some of the couple's survivors who say Missouri prosecutors dashed their hope for the death penalty. When Shealy was asked if he had something to say, he spoke publicly for the first time. It took him about 20 minutes to read a 14-page statement in which he said he wished he could go back in time and talk to the disgruntled young man that he was to take back this horrible crime. Nicholas Shealy apologized to police, crime scene technicians, reporters, and detectives touched by his crimes. He said he was shocked that Missouri prosecutors took the death penalty off the table, and he hoped that God would use him to help prisoners. He even quoted the Shawshank Redemption, referring to prisoners in repeated utterances. He mentioned Morgan Freeman's character, Red, and how he said, "Not a day goes by that he doesn't regret it. What I did 10 years ago was wrong. You know what it's like to be in the presence of pure evil. You can feel it as soon as he walks in the room," said Patrick Steed, who was Estes' son-in-law. Carrie Randall, whose father was one of Shealy's murder victims in Galesburg, Illinois, said, "We are all angry and disappointed. This is totally unjust." As for Shealy's apology, Randall was unimpressed. I believe they offer acting classes in prison. She traveled from Central Illinois for the hearing that day. Dallas Branson, whose only son Brock was among Shealy's many victims, said he didn't believe anything that was said. He is a manipulator and is pure evil. When you kill 8 people like that, you can't ever make anything like that up. A bad guy makes an apology, but there's no apology for the 8 people who are gone. Shealy is serving life sentences for 6 murders in Illinois. They dropped their pursuit of the death penalty for Shealy, but thereafter, former Governor Pat Quinn signed legislation abolishing that penalty. I believe God is intervening and wants to use us as an ambassador. Prosecutors filed notice on June 8, 2015 in Jefferson County of their intent to press for Shealy's execution. In a jailhouse interview after the sentencing, Shealy said he wrote a statement hours before the hearing and doesn't know why prosecutors spared him. I didn't see that coming. Those things weren't planned out. of his motive for killing both of the Estises and the family. He said, "We crossed paths. It happens." The couple had lived in Arkansas. The Jennings High School sweethearts were the last of Shealy's victims. Police believed he came to Jefferson County because he was looking for a woman who once wrote to him from a home in Festus. So it was terrible. He even killed one of the Bransons. He killed all of these people right there in Illinois and literally showed some remorse, not much, especially for killing 8 people. It's an unbelievable story. Thank you. In less than 3 weeks, Nicholas Troy Sheley's killing spree spanned 5 cities in Illinois and Missouri. Left on his path were 8 victims, all brutally beaten over the head to death. It began June 14, 2008, when Shealy robbed an elderly woman for cash and checks at her nearby home. A few days later, on June 23rd, Shealy would go to the home of 93-year-old Russell Reed, and he would beat the elderly man to death there and took all of his cash. He then threw Reed's body into the trunk of Reed's truck and abandoned the vehicle on a dusty road. A forensic pathologist would later testify that the 93-year-old died after suffering dozens of blows. 5 days after that, on June 28th, Shealy stole a uniform and vehicle from Illinois Oil Products, and he went to Galesburg then. He made a stop at Southard's car wash, encountering 65-year-old Ronald Randall. Randall was bludgeoned to death with hammers. His body was dumped by the dumpsters behind the local Hy-Vee, not to be discovered until 3 days later. I looked down and saw Jelani, and on top of her head she wasn't even moving, and she was covered in blood. Around 11, Nicholas Troy Sheley arrived back in the Sterling Rock Falls area again, driving to the apartment of 29-year-old Brock Branson. Sheley first beats Branson's roommate to death, 25-year-old Kenneth Ulvey, over the head with a hammer. Sheley then attacks Branson, 20-year-old Kalina Bake, and her 2-year-old son, Dayon. So just imagine that. He killed them all and killed the whole family, including the 2-year-old Dayon, which is just unbelievable, with a hammer, of all things. That's correct. Killed him with a hammer. Branson's parents found their bodies after the phone calls went unreturned for 2 whole days. I looked down and saw Kalina, and on top of her head she wasn't moving. She was covered in blood. I hollered and said Brock, but got no answer. I said, "They are now all gone. They're all dead." And his wife Connie wanted to go up, and I said no. Connie described that moment to her husband. He came back down and he was nervous. Nicholas Shealy left Sterling Rock Falls one last time and headed to Festus, Missouri. He was searching for a former prison pen pal. That's where he encountered 54-year-olds Tom and Jill Estes, a couple who had arrived back at the hotel from a graduation party. Shealy immediately attacked the couple and beat them over the head with a hammer to death. He loaded their bodies and dropped them behind a gas station dumpster. Shealy is finally arrested on July 1st, 2008, after a huge murder spree. And it was just sickening that there was also somebody at the hotel who seemed to enable Shealy's horrific actions. So a lot of people don't know about this case, and I'll show just one little more snippet here, but definitely get this case out to a wider audience. People need to know what happened here. Nicholas Shealy was one of the worst serial killers probably in all of Illinois history, and it's a worthwhile history lesson as well to learn about the people who assisted him, who might have enabled him as well. Thank you. Brock Branson, his fiancée, Kalina Blake, and her son Dayon, age 2. Nicholas Shealy believed that Mr. Branson was seeing his estranged wife Holly and decided to exact revenge. The prosecution's case focused heavily on Shealy's DNA, which experts said was found in this apartment that same night. Prosecutors also showed images of Nicholas Shealy taken from security cameras the days following the killings, in which there were clothing and belongings with the victims. After killing Randall, Shealy went to see his estranged wife Holly at a friend's house, and they went for a ride in someone's stolen vehicle. At the trial, Miss Shealy testified, "I felt like my butt was getting cold or a little wet. When we came underneath the street lamp, I had blood all over my hands, and I started freaking out, but he just kept on driving." They stopped by a Holiday Inn in Rock Falls, where Miss Shealy used to work, and took a walk by a nearby canal where, to keep the peace, she agreed to intercourse. Holly Shealy did not volunteer this information to police until her DNA was found on cigarettes in the truck. She claimed that she was scared and offered immunity for her testimony that same day. Steve Nate, the Assistant Attorney General, said Mr. Branson walked in the door and the defendant ambushed them that same night. He hits them on the head and they go down on their hands and knees. They're on their hands and knees as the defendant beats them over the head over and over with a hammer. Nicholas Shealy killed Brock, he killed Kai, he killed Diane, and he killed Kenny, or Kenneth. Shealy rocked back and forth in his chair as Judge Jeffrey O'Connor read the verdict. "I hope you rot," said Jody Fitzgerald, the sister of Brock Branson. Sentencing in the Rockfall killing is set for 11 a.m. on August 11th. He next faces the charges of murder of Jill and Tom Estes of Sherwood, Arkansas. Shealy meets Holly Gall. They become friends, but there is no romance. And this was the timeline, the original timeline in this case. He met Holly in 2000, and then in November of 2006, Holly Gall begins dating Brock Branson. Holly Gall and Brock Branson split in April of 2007. May 10th, 2008, Shealy and Holly Gall get married. Shealy murders 93-year-old Russell Reed in June 23rd of 2008. Puts him in the back of a car. In June 26th of 2008, Shealy murders Ronald Randall and leaves him behind a canal. June 30th, 2008, Shealy murders Brock Branson and 3 others. And then Shealy is arrested. So, it's quite a story. And his parents, both of his parents, were then arrested for, being complicit in the cover-up. You can read about that and look into that if you like. But Mr. Bindi, who ran there's the family that he killed. It's just really tragic. They look like a great family, But Mr. Bindi, who was the owner of the bar that he stayed at, he ignored most of Shealy's interactions with other people and his strange behavior when he would go outside and start stalking the victim and so on. So you could consider him to be complicit as well. And there's a lot to this case, so I encourage you to make sure to spread the word. As always, like and subscribe. Get this in front of a lot more people. Thank you again. Coming up next, Missouri.